So I hope this conversation this afternoon will be very enriching for us all. You all know that the theme of this year's Skoll World Forum is belief, and it would be impossible, it would be wrong, in fact, to have a conversation about belief where we didn't talk about the role of religious belief in the world. And so the title of this session is When Beliefs Collide, and what we want to do is look at the interrelationship, the interplay between religion and power in a geopolitical sense. I think, as you'll see from this fantastic panel, who I'll introduce to you in a minute, if you take a step back and look at the world, there's this extraordinary polarity. On the one hand, you have a wellspring of inspiration, of courage, of conviction that leads to service and compassion and incredible works of goodness. And I think that was embodied in everything we heard from Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, last night. And on the other side, you have this incredibly warped distortion of ideology that can be a great force for good into something that's become incredibly mutated and barbaric and manifested in things like Boko Haram and ISIS. And what we want to do today is not try and discern right from wrong. We want to examine, we want to probe, we want to leave here with a better understanding of a kind of chemical reaction that takes place when you meld ideology with individuals, with old and new structures of power, with the kind of sedimentary layers of culture and history. And we want to ask ourselves, how do we get a better understanding of this? What do we need to do about it? And how is this going to be projected into the future? So with me today to help tease out this, and I want to say on behalf of everyone that we're coming at this from the point of view that there is no experts. None of us have all the answers in this room. So the brains next to me are here to help elucidate some ideas and help stimulate your thinking so we can have a conversation today. And we would like the conversation to be bold, to be brave, to be honest, but most of all, we'd like it to be grounded in respect. And so that's the premise on which we'd like to have this conversation today, because I know that many people in this room will believe very, very different things. And we want to be able to talk about some very, very meaningful and potentially kind of contentious themes coming from a place of respect for each other's beliefs and each other. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful panel. I'm not going to say much about them because I think very quickly you'll get to know them both as individuals and the work that they do through this discussion. But let me just say they are both wonderful as human beings and in the work that you do. So it gives me great pleasure to put them before you today. I'll go from my right to my left. So Karen Che, who is from Bridges for Justice, and you'll hear more about Karen's amazing work a bit later. Gidon Bromberg, who is with Ecopeace Middle East, and again, some fascinating insights to the practical application of programs in contexts very, very coloured by faiths of different kinds. Carne of Independent Diplomat, who we've worked with for some time, and Matthew Lawrence of the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open with some of their reflections, and we'll then come to you to open up for questions and your comments. So please jot stuff down, the ideas as they come up. They'll all interject briefly, like 5 minutes each or so, and then we're going to open it up to you. So I'm hoping that we'll have a really rich discussion. Please make sure your phone's switched off, and as ever, you are free to tweet their words of wisdom on the Skoll World Forum hashtag. Matthew, can I ask you to kick us off and to really set the scene for us? So can you depict for us, help us understand where and how is religion playing a role in the world today, and what are the things you think we need to understand to really get to grips with to even start a conversation like this?
Great, sure, thanks Gemma. Yeah, well Gemma's asked me to really look at things at the kind of macro level, and really I probably want to set out to you today what is important about religion, why is religion important, and what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that we have from religion. And I've got a couple of slides to do this. Peter Berger refuted his own secularization theory by saying the world is massively religious. And I just really wanted us to dwell on that for a moment, because it's often easy in Western secular societies to forget that. This map demonstrates this somewhat counterintuitively, but it does show that secularism is the exception, not the norm. And it is really very much perhaps slightly discounting China for kind of data and obvious population reasons, but is a European exceptionalism. Religion is dominant. Religious belief is dominant in all these other areas of the world. And these are often the areas of the world where development and security concerns are the most important. And religious belief is a fact of life, a lived reality for those people whose lives we are trying and working together to improve and to change. So religion has never gone away. It is still there, and we need to interact with it. Also, the trend is up, both in terms of absolute numbers. Religious communities and populations are growing faster than those that have a lower affiliation with religion. But also in terms of a trend towards conservative, or what some people might call fundamentalist manifestations of religion. So whether that trend is really something that is a consequence of globalization or a way of dealing with globalization, I think is something that's interesting to consider. So this data and I would suggest, very briefly, that there's a huge opportunity of engaging with religion. If we're going to end hunger, if we're going to end poverty, if we're going to educate our young people, if we're going to bring about safe and secure societies, we need to be engaging with religion and with religious actors. But there's also, as well as this huge opportunity, and the opportunity is real as well. We work in particular with many religious organizations and groups. They have networks, they have social understanding, responsibilities and morality that are useful resources. And those people are willing to apply themselves for change for good. But as Gemma said in her introduction, there's a huge challenge for religion in the world today. And if we could perhaps just move to the second slide I have. Religious ideology is tearing the world apart. Ideology is being used to justify horrific brutality, disenfranchising, persecuting, and in some places even destroying minorities. Those that manipulate it are attaining, appropriating, and subverting traditional power structures, from religious authorities to statecraft, from the media to petroleum markets, from diplomacy to social provision. And so we need to engage with religion, and with those religious actors, and with that religious ideology to protect our societies. We need to undermine these devastating narratives together, and we need innovative solutions to do that, because those perpetrating those ideologies are innovative. We need to develop and secure open-minded societies for the future. How do we go about that together? How can we use education? How can we use the work that we do together in order to bring about the good of religion whilst countering these destructive ideologies? I'm thrilled that we've got a packed room here today, because that means that you all want to engage in that. And we really want to learn and interact with you, what you're seeing on the ground, what your experiences are, so that we can secure better religious communities for the future. Thank you. Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, Matthew. Carne, in the course of your work, you're dealing with communities who are confronting, the nexus between religious ideology and power in many senses. I don't know whether you want to start there or more broadly, but it would be very fascinating to hear both from your practical experience and then the broader worldview that you have in reaction to Matthew, or taking it further.
Sure, thank you. I mean, my starting point is conflict. independent diplomat deals with conflict all over the world. I've dealt with a lot of conflicts in my diplomatic career, including conflicts that my country started. I think a lot about conflict and how to stop it. And I have a couple of points I want to make. The first is I strongly object to the depiction of most conflicts as religious in nature, and the depiction, such as the graph we've just seen, that religion is the explanatory factor behind a certain number of terrorist incidents. I actually object to the word terrorist as well, because I think it's highly misleading and actually obscures any sensible analysis of the political phenomena we're dealing with, because the conflicts that I see are largely local in origin and political in nature, and may have a layer of religious ideology playing a part in it, and religion is not something that can be dismissed in these conflicts, but that the invocation of religion as the explanatory or the dominant descriptive factor of these conflicts is highly misleading and benefits particular groups of people, and we have to be clear about who benefits from these depictions. I'll take an example. The Sahel is a region that Independent Diplomat deals with in different ways. We support the government of Somaliland in Somalia. We advise at the other end of the Sahel the liberation movement, the Frente Polisario of the occupied Western Sahara. And across the Sahel, you will see an increasing number of people in the West, but also elsewhere, at the UN, where there's now an envoy for the Sahel, described as this band of religious terrorism, this band of extremism across the Sahel, as if there's some kind of uniting factor that connects the Shabab with AQIM in southern Algeria, with Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. And when you look at these conflicts individually, you see that in fact they originated from something else. Shabab originated from a battle for the control of Somalia, a failed state. South central Somalia, not by any means all of Somalia. Boko Haram, part of its origins lay in the misgovernment of Nigeria and the misallocation of the substantial resources of the center of Nigeria to the north. AQIM arose originally from the Algerian Civil War, where a military coup effectively ended a democratic process which was going to elect an Islamist government, a military coup that was supported by France and the West. I could continue. One iteration of this discourse is that Morocco, the occupier of the Western Sahara, is attempting to depict the Frente Polisario, which is a secular Guevarist liberation movement of the old kind, if you like, as Islamist extremists. And everywhere you go, where you see Islamism in particular, religious extremism, if you want to generalize about it, described as the problem, you see that there are different political origins to these particular disputes. And there are people who benefit from this depiction. For instance, extremism is described as a dangerous force in Iraq, Syria. I don't deny that it is. But each of these places, the conflicts began in Iraq. The origin of the crisis we see, the breakup of Iraq, the internecine warfare we see across Iraq, began, of course, with the Allied invasion in 2003, which was started by secular countries claiming international law as their justification, in fact led by people who believed in a higher kind of law, in my view, because international law on which I worked at the time on Iraq certainly did not justify the invasion. Syria, the breakup of Syria, the rise of ISIS, Islamist extremism in Syria, began when a group of boys wrote graffiti on the wall denouncing the secular dictator of Syria, Assad. And when he started to repress that revolution violently, the civil war started. We have to get clear about what we're talking about, and I find it extremely troubling when I see generalized descriptions of conflict of terrorism, which is itself an obscuring and generalizing term, about lots of different highly complex phenomena. Just to take Syria as an example, which is now, you know, ISIS versus al-Nusra versus the Palestinians versus the Rojava Kurds versus the Free Syrian Army, blah, blah, blah. There are several different conflicts playing out. Above those local conflicts, including a regional contest of influence between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is of a classical geopolitical and not necessarily religious kind. There is a great power confrontation between Russia and the West. I could continue. There are several different overlaying conflicts. The general point I want to make is that when we're looking at these conflicts individually, it's profoundly important that we look at the local causes. And it's profoundly important that we seek solutions that are human solutions negotiated by real people. That when we seek to alter these dialogues and talk about them as religious dialogues, I believe we are avoiding the main point. And I think people like us, people who care about peace, people who care about tolerance and respect, need to get very clear about these conflicts and be very clear that human agreements, whether embodied in law or international law, domestic law, or simply in the form of agreements between groups of people, are superior to all other kinds of law and must be given that primacy if we're to get anywhere in resolving these disputes.
Thanks, Carne. I know that's... I know lots of you will have that will no doubt kind of like furnish a lot of thoughts both for what Matthew of Carne said, and don't worry, we will take the chance to come back to you and let you unearth a lot of that and talk that through. I wanted just to use Chair's prerogative and bring in a good friend and wonderful man in the audience, Mushtaq Chopra, because Carne, you talked about the importance of applying it to a very local situation, and I think Mushtaq, you and I were talking recently, and I think through the work Mushtaq is himself, I think you called yourself that, I hope I can too, a devout Muslim, somebody who's working in Pakistan and is very much inspired by his faith to do some of the extraordinary work he does bringing education.
Right. Thank you, Gemma.
How do you think about this?
Mushtaq Chopra, I'm the founder and the chair of the Citizens Foundation, which is an organization in Pakistan which is building and managing schools for the underprivileged children, girls and boys. And it started off with 5 schools, but now we have about 1,000+ schools in the most remote areas of Pakistan. I totally subscribe to what Matthew said. Religion has always been used as a trump card for conflict, for issues which not necessarily are linked to religion. And I personally feel, because I worked with people in Pakistan, in the village and the slums, who have the basic right is not there, illiteracy, because of lack of education. This is being distorted and taken into an area which forces these people into conflict. So the point is that I personally feel, as I said, that 98% of the Pakistani population are Muslims. However, Islam does not preach radicalism or terrorism. These are tradition, cultures, local conditions which have creeped into the fabric of society, and this has created and the media is not helping. I'm sorry to say this, that it's being distorted in all, the rationale is not there. Now, 20 years into this business of educated children, we have got 160,000 families who think otherwise. They are not brainwashed into doing things which they're not supposed to do. So my firm belief is that in areas of conflict, in areas where we should go into details and find the real cause. What is the issue? Is it political, or is it in some other sense another problem coming up, and not generalize this issue at hand? I personally am of this opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And this leads me perfectly to your work, because the work that you do in one of the where religious tensions play probably, you know, play out on a daily basis. And the work that you're doing, not only, you're not doing the work despite that, you're using people's faiths to inform the work that you do. So be very, very grateful to hear about your own personal experience of this.
So at EcoPeace Middle East, I want to also note that our Palestinian director, Nada Khatib, is also here in the audience, and Munqidh Mehiyar, our Jordanian director. Our work really speaks to, again, that it is local politics and it's geopolitics that count. And the conflict of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan is not a conflict of religion. Yet, despite that, I would say religion has been impotent. Religion has allowed the demise, and that's something that we focus on in order to reverse, in order to strengthen the hand of cooperation. Religion has allowed, our religions have allowed perhaps the most holy river, certainly to the Abrahamic faiths, to turn into a sewage canal. Despite the fact that it's the spot where Jews see the entry or the end of slavery and the start of freedom, and Christians see the cleansing, the baptism of Christ as the place of purity. And Muslims who see both the Jewish and Christian prophets as also Muslim prophets have 4 of the companions to the Prophet Muhammad buried along the eastern banks of the River Jordan. Yet despite the religious importance of this river to the 3 Abrahamic faiths, the Jewish state is responsible for half the demise of the river and took half the water. And the majority Muslim Syria and Jordan took the other half. And Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians have been pouring raw sewage into this river that our 3 Abrahamic faiths see as holy. And so we've been working really in the reverse and trying to capture the hearts and minds of our religious leaders, both locally and internationally, but first of all locally, the religious values that our 3 Abrahamic faiths speak to that are not reflected in how our governments behave and how the conflict has led to the complete demise for political and geopolitical reasons. And in our effort to reverse that, we don't just speak about religion, of course. We speak how to overcome those political and geopolitical issues that are at the heart of the conflict. And of course that's the creation, that's a 2-state solution of Israel and Palestine living together in peace and all 3 being recognized as riparians to that river. But to utilize religious leadership, and I can tell you, we were initially scared of trying to bring on faith-based communities because we were fearful that that would lead to more animosity. But I must say we're surprised. And in the last 2 years, we've succeeded to bring together, we had an event last year in Jordan where there was a signing of a covenant, and the chief, the Mufti of Jerusalem signed the covenant together with the Rabbinate of Israel and several of the archbishops from Jerusalem. In fact, it was the first time that the Mufti of Jerusalem shook the hand of an Israeli rabbi at this event. So on the one hand, we see that we can capture, we can utilize the good that was mentioned earlier in religion to help overcome, to help build some trust. And beyond that, we've started to see how this type of exemplary type of relationship building goes beyond our own area. And so there was a group in Sydney of interfaith Jews, Muslims and Christians that adopted the theme of the rehabilitation of the Jordan as an issue that they can work with. Similarly here in London, similarly here in New York. And I think we need to grab the positive of religion in order to counter and reverse and raise awareness as to how to overcome the hard politics, the geopolitics that are at the heart of the conflict, not the religion itself.
That's it's very inspiring. And I want to also bring Karen in there, because Karen, similarly, I mean, you're going to take us to a different, I think it's too easy to get centred and focused only on, as you said, the Abrahamic faith. And actually what we're talking about is a belief system across the globe that stretches far and wide and is incredibly diverse. And before opening to the floor, can you just tell us a bit about the work that you do, which takes us beyond?
Okay, great. I guess part of it is about grabbing the positive. And there are absolutely horrific and terrible things happening. And at the same time, what has really inspired me is the beliefs, and they're really different from all different religions of the defenders that we work with. So I run an organization called International Bridges of Justice, and the goal of the organization is to end torture as an investigative tool in developing countries by placing lawyers early on in police stations and courtrooms. And one of the things that, and it's not a religious organization, it's not a faith-based organization, but over and over again what we've seen is how it really drives the leadership in so many different ways. So one example I can give is that we were recently in Singapore, and we brought a number of officials from Myanmar, Burma, and they included a number of lawyers who had been activists, some of the heads of the military police, as well as the Attorney General's office at the Supreme Court. And what we didn't realize until they all got there is that some of the same people who were in jail and tortured were there at the same time that the military police was. So it was very tense, actually, throughout the first few days. And at some point, I remember I sat down next to one of the members of the military police, and they were all looking at how they can move on. And he said to me, "There's so much animosity, there's so much intensity." And he said, "You know, I understand why, like, these people hate me." He said, "But if we're really to rebuild this country, we have to release." And he suggested that I suggest to the whole group that we go to a Buddhist temple the next day. And so the next day I said, "Hey, should we do this?" And they all said, "Yes." We got in the bus, and everyone threw water on everybody. Everyone had their little red band, and it was absolutely amazing how it transformed the relationships, like almost immediately. And now, as you all know, there are terrible things happening in Myanmar with the conflicts with the Buddhists and the Muslims. This is really horrific and awful. And some of these same people have come back to me to say, "Listen, while we were able to understand each other as Buddhists, even though we had a conflictual past, and move forward, can we find ways of also bringing people together just focused on the exact same issue, which is this, you know, giving people access to counsel." So not really getting necessarily into all the politics. It's not kind of ignoring like the big elephant in the room, and yet at the same time saying, you know, what can we create for this? And this is what we see too. We have in the last years had a number of interfaith peace vigils. And in our last one in January, it occurred just 1 week after Charlie Hebdo. So it was very, you know, everything was going on. And it was so moving because the Buddhist monk came, the Jewish rabbi came, they all came. And the one that they were most moved by is they said, you know, my brother, my Muslim brother, who said, you know, we are all about love. So at the end of the day, you know, it may be about beliefs, but it may be extremism that's colliding, not the beliefs that are grounded in love and the best places. That's
a very wonderful and eloquent way to end up in terms of the panel's opening gambits. What I want to do is I'm going to try and experiment in terms of how we curate this conversation, because as soon as we open up, I expect a kind of like torrent of passion and opinion. And what I'd like to do is I'll start on this side of the room. And I'd like the first round of questions or comments, and they can be either. All I'd ask that if it's a comment, you keep it pretty brief. I'll take the first one. Keep your hand up if you think your question is related to the one that it's just been asked, and we'll try and get the discussion to kind of build on each other, and then I'm going to try and move it on. So we're going to start with the big picture, and then we're going to move it on to your experiences actually of what in your work you've done, like Gidon and Karen, to harness this as a force for good. And just before we do, can I have a show of hands for who in this room in your lives or in your work is religion an active and salient feature in what you do and who you are? Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so who would like to ask the first question or have the first comment? And please say your name when you start. There's great responsibility on your shoulders because you're this is the whole tide of conversation that you're going to set here.
I actually have a question, which is, it occurs to me that when you look at these sorts of things, one takes the log out of one's own eye.
Right.
And to what extent does the panel think that as Western societies, we've adopted a sort of extremist position of neoliberal economics, and that somehow we're seeing a pushback against that?
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to make sure we hear from you a bit before we go back to our panelists. So please take a note of that question. Excellent one. Is there anyone who'd like to either ask another question or actually interject a comment? Yes.
Thank you.
Please let us know who you are.
Sorry, Sylvia Hassai. I work with Big Bang Philanthropy. And the one thing I haven't heard much about yet in this conversation is women. And that's a huge, huge lens when it comes to religion. I just want to have that addressed at some point from your points of view.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is André Degenschen. I'm from Brazil, from the National Association of Foundations. My question, and I think many of you touch on that point, is for you to explore a bit more the relation between religion and politics. Because sometimes you were mentioning, well, this is not a matter of religion, this is politics. But we know that religion plays a very relevant part in terms of mobilizing people around political issues. So I'd like to hear from you more on that.
Okay, thank you. Lady in the middle here. Yeah, anyone else?
Hi there, thank you. Anna Marie Harling from UBS. We work with a lot of private philanthropists, and obviously in the media there's a huge amount about, yes, the rise of the Islamic State and ISIS. And one of the big questions we face is, if you are a private philanthropist, what can you do to really combat this? Is it a question of religion? Is it a question of politics? Is it, partnering with organizations that are really dealing with these other issues on the ground? What should be our advice to philanthropists who are interested in looking and helping with these type of conflicts?
Okay, excellent. And then last one for this one, gentleman.
Hi, yes, Jay Cordes from the UN Foundation. Just would like to hear from the panel's perspective their thoughts on religion and economics. I do understand the geopolitical and the politics of it, but the belief systems based around economics and potentially links to the neoliberalism aspects. Just your thoughts on belief in economics, religion and economics.
Excellent. Okay, you're all in the mood for inquiry and not comments. I will, yes, gentleman at the front.
Thank you. My name is Leonid Gozman. I'm from Russia. And I'm there are only two guys from Russia on this forum, and
we're very glad to have you with us.
Russia is a very small country, something between China and Finland.
But you were on the graph, weren't you?
Yeah, certainly. And Russian fundamentalistic oriented Russian Orthodox, they are very active now in supporting the war we began in Europe, in Ukraine, in supporting authoritarian tendencies as a country, in destroying exhibitions they do not like, in blocking theaters' performances they do not like, and so on and so on. But I think, maybe, and it's a question to you, most of them never practiced Russian Orthodoxy several years ago. They just began very religious. So I think that maybe the religious is not more, and maybe in other countries as well, the religion is not more than rationalization of your feelings. When people feel themselves humiliated, for example, or when they persuaded that they are humiliated by propaganda, they are looking for something to explain them what do they feel. And religion is a very good explanation. It's a very good explanation. I believe in Jesus Christ, and so I feel this and this feelings, so I support the war, so I support something else, and so on.
Okay.
I think that when we are trying to analyze religion itself, we'll understand nothing. We must analyze something, the attitudes which are beyond religion.
Okay, so let me. I'm going to take lead from that and bring us back to the panel and try and take us through some of the questions that were raised there. let's start with economics, because that's not something that we touched on in the initial remarks. And let me come back, Carne, to you first, because I think you were getting there in some of the conflicts that you were talking about. But don't stay necessarily rooted in conflict-related situations. So we had a question about the general relationship, and the one about the specific one about neoliberal economics and the link between.
Yeah, really, really interesting questions. I mean, I think there is a real point to your comment about the fact that the West has been pushing a particular construct, a particular set of ideas of neoliberalism, neoclassical economics. Having thought about this a lot and studied economics, I come to the conclusion that neoclassical economics is an ideology, it's not a science. It is a political ideology about how society should be ordered and how humans behave, a highly reductive ideology of humans as utility maximizing consumers, of inequality as an inevitable part of human society, of growth. I could continue. But this is not founded in science. It is a constructed political idea that benefits a certain group of people. And that group of people is growing smaller. And therefore the efforts to propound it as an ideology will grow more aggressive. And if one sees it as an ideology, you begin to see that actually it's not dissimilar from religion. And there are some radical economists who would equate capitalism with religious belief, given its lack of foundation in scientific truth. And that therefore what we are looking at is actually a conflict of ideologies. It's not between some paradigm of democracy and liberal stability. It is a conflict of ideologies, whether you call them Islamism or religious extremism or capitalism. And I began to think about this when I met activists in the Arab Spring. I met a young anarchist who unfortunately is now in jail in Egypt, who said he wasn't fighting for liberal democracy, he was fighting for real democracy, for a shared economy. He wasn't looking to the West as the model of what he wished to espouse, which is where all the kind of sentimentality about the Facebook revolution really missed what was going on in Egypt. In Tunisia, the daughter of Rashid Ghannouchi, one of the reasons why Tunisia is today stable, relatively, said to me that she didn't want Western democracy either. She didn't want corrupt democracy. She didn't want inequality. She didn't want a society that is essentially empty. And I can't help but feel that I feel Voltairean about it, that the West needs to tend its own garden first before it goes around preaching to others, telling them how they should behave. Because we have a lot of problems that are profound and getting worse. But when I look at these extraordinary stories of young people going to Syria to join radical groups, I wonder why that is, and part of me would like to blame it on the Iraq War and all the rest of it, but there is clearly something else. It is the appeal of certainty over emptiness. Capitalism is an empty ideology. It is not for anything. It misses the things that are most important about us, which are not termed in neoclassical economics. They do not have numbers. They do not even have names or words. They are things about love, about meaning, about fulfillment. And unless we can redesign ourselves an ideology and reflect on what we are as a society, we are not going to convince other people who are committed to certain ideologies, whether they're religion or anything else.
Okay, as soon as I hear something said that provokes ripples in the audience, I'm going to come back to you before coming back here. So is there anyone that would like to add on, disagree with, contend with? I think that there were two main threads to Carne's comments there. One was about, we are in a bastion of kind of capitalist thinking here. There must be people in this room who may not necessarily agree with capitalism as an ideology in the way that Carne depicted. Anything you want to say about that? And then the second thread in terms of what that's doing in terms of the things to which people are attracted and deflected from. Yes.
My name is Emily Nielsen Jones, and I am a recovering religious fundamentalist. And I say that because I've grown up with religious fundamentalism. I do believe what you're saying is true, that economic fundamentalism, or the ideology around that, is as deeply rooted and invisible, and I really appreciate the way you're linking those together. It's not easy to go there, so amen.
Okay, anyone going to take? Nicely done. And we're going to take one more interjection from the audience on this, and I'm going to move on to the other questions. So anyone else on? Yes, sir. And please keep telling us who you are.
Kim Wall from Voxtra, Oslo, Norway. Just a quick add-on to, we now talked about capitalism. Does that, or how do we add on democracy to that word? How important is democracy? Is that sound, or should we open up more for more different types of government, and how does that influence this discussion?
They're the same thing. Democracy as we have it is a form of, is the reflection of capitalism, and that's why we don't have real democracy. You can't have an unequal economy with wealth concentrated in a very small group of people and have real democracy.
Okay, great. I'm going to, yes, go on, come in, and then I'm going to move us on. Yeah.
My name is Gregory Khalil. I co-founder of Telos Group in Washington, D.C., which builds pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian constituencies, valuing security, dignity, freedom for both Israelis and Palestinians. And we do quite a lot of work with faith constituencies, but in listening to your comments, Carne, I wanted to agree and to push a little further and to say that capitalism and Western society doesn't even do a good job at holding itself accountable to its own values with respect to faith constituencies. And specifically, what I mean by that is the fundamental tenet of realpolitik is to see the world as it is and to engage it as it is, not as we would like it to be. And we as human beings, belief is foundational, and it most of the time expresses itself in religion. And I know when I was working on Israeli-Palestinian negotiations back 2004 to 2008, we thought, well, let's leave religion out of this because those people are irrational. They're crazy. But then everyone who actually cares about the subject matter views it through a religious lens. And it doesn't mean that you adopt that religious lens, but it means that you treat other human beings where they are, as they are, and allow them to organize and to partner with them at a horizontal level in a way that allows us to talk about fundamental values where we agree, as well as recognizing the interest structures in which we all operate. And I think the West could do a much better job of just simply holding itself accountable to its fundamental tenets, although I do agree with your second comment about core values, which we often miss.
Thank you. It's a fantastic contribution, and I think there's a theme emerging here of treating human beings as whole, whether through systems or ideologies. And I'm going to take the questions that you've given me and try and meld them a bit so that they fit in with the conversation as it's flowing. So, Matthew, if I move on to you about the question of, well, what do philanthropists do about this? How can we actually engage with this practically and try and eke out the good? And can you just please add on to that, not just in terms of religious ideology, but also is there something that the West does need to do in terms of thinking about its own political ideology, political and economic ideology, in terms of the way that philanthropists as well are addressing this? So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I probably want to talk about a wonderful intervention earlier from the Citizens Foundation, which is doing amazing work and try and tie a few of these things together that we've talked about. We talk about education for the open mind, and we look at that's at the core of our work and what we do and how we seek to change some of these narratives, these ideologies that are closed-minded, wherever they might be coming from. And that's crucially important. And so I think supporting education initiatives that give people other opportunities, that enhance the ability to test these ideas, to work through them, to bring about self-determination more readily and more quickly, are crucial. So looking at some of those initiatives. Somebody also mentioned the role of women. The role of women in this is crucial. We heard some of that from the speakers last night at the plenary and the opportunity in that. There is amazing work, for example, going on in Kenya with women's organisations warning against those being radicalised, then working very closely with the security services to bring about a different model of functioning in society. So there are opportunities there to really explore how we can have different models. We need different models to deal with this. Some of that we've been talking about the failure of our systems and our ideas and our practices in addressing some of these questions. And people need to be asking those questions, testing them. There's a lot of talk around, and I was at a Foreign Office conference a few weeks ago talking about what do we do in terms of countering the ISIS brand, what do we do about countering radicalization, the use of overarching religious narratives to recruit young people. But narrative isn't enough, and we got talking about counter-opportunity. Young people need different opportunities to the ones they're getting, but actually it's not even always that. There are people with plenty of opportunities going. It's not just the uneducated that are being recruited. In some cases it's more than others, perhaps with Boko Haram, but certainly those going to Syria and Iraq at the moment, often very well educated. So why are they making those different choices, as Carne said, to leave? So there's something around identity and a counter-identity, and that's where we really need to look at ourselves and our own societies and what we're getting wrong. Why do these young people want to not identify with the society in which they grew up? Why do they see something more compelling, a better opportunity, a better idea elsewhere? We challenge and think about that, Gemma.
Thanks, Martin. I just want to bring Gidon here, and I'm sure you have lots to say, and Cameron will come to you as well. One, can we all just add in the, I think the comment about women, can we please just speak to that in all of the answers on everything, because I think it's such an underlying thing. Let's not have a woman question. So please hold yourselves all accountable for answering that.
To an end of geopolitical, but women's equality, beliefs colliding.
Right.
This is the invisible
elephant in the room. Exactly. So let's put that there, and it's not a question. It's it's there. But what I wanted to ask you was, do you think philanthropists understand this? Is there a sophisticated enough level of understanding for you to get the kind of support for the transformative work you're doing? And what could you do to help hold a mirror up for us in the West, to speak to some of the kind of critique that Carne and others in this room have given us to better understand it from the work that you've done? And then anything else you want to say?
Great. So I'll try and keep it brief. Firstly, I think philanthropists are so scared to touch these issues that they're partly responsible for the success of these conflicts. That by avoiding these issues, they don't go away. The conflicts just deepen and get so much more vile. And therefore we need philanthropists to engage, and we understand it's difficult and they're going to receive pushback. But if you want to make a difference, you need to raise your voice, and that really is a calling here for philanthropists to be engaged in these issues. But I also want to speak to the issue of politics and religion, because that's a critical issue. Politicians, since time immemorial, have used religion for their own political gain. And in this way, I would differ a little bit to what Carne was saying. Capitalism is the current political spectrum. But when there was monarchies and feudalism, you saw the Crusaders capture in the name of God, a Christian God, and slaughter Muslims, Jews, and Christians, and whoever else was there in Jerusalem, in the name of God. And that wasn't a capitalist system. It was cheap politics. Netanyahu used cheap politics several weeks ago when he, days before the elections, or the day of the election in Israel, says the Arabs are coming on buses. It's a tribal tactic that's so damn effective. The Muslim Brotherhood constantly use Al-Aqsa is at risk. Not because they really believe that Al-Aqsa is at risk, or that they care about their own power, and they utilize religion for their own narrow interests, and humankind has been doing that since time immemorial. And I think what we have to do is to recognize that and develop strategies to expose it. It's unacceptable, it's cheap, it's contrary to our beliefs for those that believe in the respective religions, or those that believe in simply humanity. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to counter that and develop and invest in countering what is cheap politics.
Going to stand for office. Okay, and Karen, I mean, I think rather than, I think actually that enabled us to kind of like cover the questions that have been asked so far. So I give you the floor to you to pick up on whatever you think is most relevant or interesting.
Okay, I'll do the women one. and not so much, not in terms of like a big picture, but I would say that, you know, one of the things that's really touching to me always is that I see these defenders, and they are going into the most dangerous areas, into the darkest corners, and so really they have to have the prophetic imagination to see something different and then go in and create it. And what's interesting to me, and it's actually linked to the women, is that it's the men. When I see the men, you know, my Cambodian dude takes me, and we always have a Buddhist ceremony. It's like strong belief, whatever. Same thing with Christianity. Our Zimbabwean guy is a born again on Sundays. He always preaches. It's very, very strong. And I will say at the same time that, and maybe it's because I'm a woman, so it touches me differently. When I'm strong, the men are there with me, man. You know, we're going. And when I'm down, it's the women who will send me an email. And it's almost intuitive. It's like, we'll send something saying, hey, this didn't work through. It's not even my email. And I'll get an email back from our justice maker in India, and she'll say, Karen, I have learned with International Bridges of Justice to never lose the faith. You know, keep on. And so it's just an interesting thing for me that I see the role of their own different, coming from different places, spirituality and belief, and yet there's a way in which there's a tenderness to it, or there's a different energy in the resilience that is remarkable to me, and I see it also in the specificities of the way that they creatively work with their projects and are able to be resourceful and bring them to life. Which is not to say that the men aren't cool too, but the women really rock.
But let me push this a bit further, because I'm just going to totally go back on what I've just said. I am going to push this thing on, because I think that what's specific here is that there's the combination. There's a very dangerous combination between religion and political power that, when fused, can, in its most toxic form, particularly be detrimental to women. So what do you have to say about that as a structural paradigm and how to shift that? Anyone? Karen, you've already talked about women. I'm going to come back to you on non-women stuff. So Gidon?
So one of the groups that I respect the most is the Women at the Wall. These are Jewish women that confront the Jewish religion, the conservative Orthodox, that don't allow them to put a kippah or a talit on their shoulders when coming to the wall, that refuse to see that 3/4 of the wall goes to men and 1/4 is left for women. You know, these, and I think so much of the change has to come, and this is another, I think, crucial issue for philanthropy. The change needs to come from within. It's not going to be accepted from without. It can't be Westerners. It can't be Westerners telling non-Westerners. It can't be Christians and Jews telling Muslims. It can't be Muslims telling Jews. You know, it needs to come from our respective communities. It needs to be homegrown. And that's what I think social entrepreneurship is all about. It's supporting those individuals that are willing to stand up and make that difference on women's issues, on religion, on capitalism, you name it. But in order to confront these issues, we need to empower the homegrown from within that community to make that difference.
Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to come to people who haven't asked anything first, and then back to you. What do we do about this? How do we? What's coming through from everyone in this conversation is how you break ideologies that have, for whatever reason, are now failing to deliver for human beings, as holistic human beings. So whether that is a form of capitalism, whether that is a particular ideology when melded with very specific circumstances, whatever. What are the people that you know who are standing up and doing something about it? What are the examples of how we can actually shift this? And are there any ideas in the room in terms of to the panelists, to each other, of what are some kind of propositions to make this better?
Well, there is a philosophical idea that's tremendously important, and it's striking, talking about the role of women, that most of the religious leaders, in fact all of the religious leaders who claim access to unique truth and a direct line to God, whether they're the Ayatollah or the leader of the Islamic State or the Pope, or those who claim a unique access to truth and what is right and wrong, like Tony Blair, they're all men. All of them. And I don't venerate all women either. You know, you look at Bangladeshi politics to see the venality of certain female politicians as well, but they don't claim unique access to God. And wherever I see that, I think the basic problem needs to be called out. It's not men necessarily, though men exploit it. It is the idea of unique truth, of one unique truth. And that idea is at the heart of, I'm afraid, many religions, and I'm not especially anti-religious, but I am anti-totalitarianism. I am anti the idea of unique truth, and I think those of us who believe in coexistence, tolerance, you call it what you like, need to assert very loudly that there is no unique truth and nobody has unique access to it. And when you see people accepting that, you also tend to see people accepting the equality of women. I don't think these things are unrelated.
Okay, one more comment before, and then I'm going to come back to Matthew. Yes. Yes, so here.
Yeah, John Linden, One Voice. Just to push back a little, we work with Israelis and Palestinians, particularly youth, to empower them and allow them to play a much more visible role in conflict resolution. And we've noticed, obviously, over the last few years, religion playing a larger role in that process than perhaps it did before. I want to slightly investigate something that Carne said. We can be incredibly critical about our own societies here. I come from this secular, capitalist, liberal bubble in Europe that we saw manifested on the graph. And we can sometimes be very relativistic, you know, so it's easy to critique that. And I share some of the critiques that came from the stage. If we identify one of the problems that exists in the more religious societies that we discussed, and I think the issues around the role that women play is very, very resonant, it's hardwired into these monotheistic faiths. I mean, it's not an accident of how the power structures are set up. It's you know, if you want to critique it very honestly, it exists at the center of them as well. Is there a role for us internationally to be very, very forthright in what we see as being, you know, incorrect or flawed power dynamics in our own societies, but equally forthright about ones we see elsewhere? Not in a neo-imperialistic way, but as seeing it as being part of the problem we're looking to address.
So equally probing of ourselves, but then prepared to advocate for what we believe are the appropriate values elsewhere.
Consistently.
Matthew.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of soul searching and struggling with Western governments and organisations of that currently. You know, how do, and we heard from DFID earlier today, how do organisations such as DFID, such as various offices for religious freedom, etc., implement their strategies around the world, and they come up frequently with hurdles around that because people believe in different sorts of truths. Many millions of people around the world believe in an absolute truth, but don't feel that that denies their identity or their ability to fully function. And as I said earlier, at a certain point we need to engage with that. We shouldn't just say, no, you shouldn't believe in an absolute truth, because that's denying your essential human rights. They would hold that that is part of their human right, to hold that truth, to hold their beliefs. But it's about having the ability to then interact with others that may also believe in an absolute truth which is different from theirs. And where that interaction happens, how can we help people to deal with that, to cope with that, rather than really just trying to create some grey mush of kind of some, because we haven't managed that, and actually people have been trying to create that for quite some time, and even to a certain extent, the interfaith project to a certain extent, and we have some great examples where it isn't failing here, but has struggled. Because actually part of globalization as well, social media, ideas are shared much more readily. They aren't actually coming necessarily from the traditional sources being passed down in these structures. So religion and the way it operates has changed. But people are still believing and holding to the truths of those faiths. And as I said earlier, the trend has often been increased conservatism. People are looking towards that. So there's a tension for us, I think, between dealing with that reality, because that's not going to change very quickly, but we want the world to change and to bring that about. So how do we meet people halfway in that? Or how do we interact with those societies where those truths are held by men and women?
Let me just bring, Karen, I want to bring in you, because your work is about many things, but I would say that one of the things is to say, you know, justice is about values. Justice is one of the things that in almost any belief system, any good one, there are very, very strong tenets about justice. And your work is about saying that within that process of justice, there are certain things which any human being should be able to agree is unacceptable. And do you feel that there are values around which, in relation to the last question that we heard, are universal enough for everyone to be able to unite around them and promote them in a way that is not seen as paternalistic, but is able to kind of like bind us in common endeavour? Do you believe it's possible?
I believe it's possible, and I see it all the time. I mean, when we do have our interfaith peace gatherings around the area of justice and ending torture, every single person stands up and says, I want to be counted. And this is why I believe it. And it's amazing to me. I mean, it's amazing to everyone. I mean, part of it, I think, is that though it sounds simple, part of it, I think, is that we have to move beyond stereotypes of other people, but even mindfulness in terms of our own tradition and thinking and being mindful and being present to really move beyond whatever the stereotypical constructs are.
Thank you. Yes, and I think, just let me check if there's somebody, for anyone else hasn't said anything before. You want to? Yeah. Well, if there's anyone else that hasn't answered the question, that asked something or said something that wants to, where? Oh, sorry, yes, yes, go for it. Yeah.
This is the most fascinating session. I have been coming to Skoll since 2006, and this is the most meaningful. And excellent, thank you, I'm happy. I would here like to state the situation of Pakistan in the global situation. And I'm Qoratulain Bakhtiyari from IDSP, Pakistan, Institute for Development Studies and Practices. And concerning the women, it's an Islamic state. I would like to address this. It's very interesting phenomena. I've been working since '79 across Pakistan at the community level, at the government level, international level, all levels. And I have come across the way things changed from the 60s and the 50s and the 80s and the 90s and currently. It's something very interesting. My one fundamental statement I would like to give about Pakistan is, in 1947, Pakistan was not liberated. We are still a colony of the 2 or 3% of the feudal lords who have taken away everything from Pakistan, and which we all know, palaces and their lifestyles. And you can see the impact on the social indicators of Pakistan. The maternity mortality rate, the children's mortality, you can see it, I won't go into that detail. Now, on the other end, there's another thing, the people of Pakistan, which are not represented or not understood by the world. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the ordinary people of Pakistan. As my friend Mr. Mushtaq said, the eagerness for education is tremendous, for girls' education. It's there. And nobody denies girls' education. I have worked across Balochistan, one of the most tribal, fundamentalist area. And I went myself to establish girls' schools in 4,000 villages. Not a single man, woman, or anybody objected on girls' education. They gave land, they gave teachers, and we came out with 300,000 girls enrolled in 5 years. The other thing is, what happens is that, unfortunately or fortunately, there happens to be a gold mine discovered in Balochistan, and Balochistan is changing completely. On the other hand, then what I have to do? I have to get the girls and women to Karachi, because everybody is blowing everybody up. And the focus is on women then. And we got them in Karachi. My last point, I studied very closely that why these men, Muslim men, are so protected of their women. as if it is gold or diamonds or whatever, somebody is going to take them away. When I worked very closely with the families, their stance was that as they came to leave the girls in Karachi to become midwives for 18 months to live with us alone, they said, we are not sure. We are the only last defender of our family in view of the current law and order situation. These are our women, girls and women. Only we are not sure that what they are going to get into, because the system is very, very corrupt at all levels.
Yeah.
And when they came to us, they saw everything, they left their girls, the young girls, and the families, and they are all very comfortable the way we have been functioning across the villages of Balochistan and in the country. What I'm saying is there's something, a lot of...
I'm just going to ask you, so I don't mean to be rude to interrupt, but I'm just being shown that we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we've got the 2 last questions before we come back to
I just want to make a statement that there's more than what sees the eyes when Pakistan is concerned.
Absolutely, and I think one of the most moving things I think we see from many societies, which in the West at least are seen as very deeply religious, is a cry from people to see a much more textured reality. And I think a lot of what people have spoken about today is exactly that, and you've given us a wonderful specific case. I just want to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to go back to the panel to wrap up, to reflect back on anything you want to. So yes, at the back.
Just a brief experience from the Philippines, Luis Oquiñena of Gawad Kalinga.
Yeah.
There was a question about religion and politics and how we can break it. We just simply have to care. Genuinely care for the people. Both politics and religion, they feed on the masses, and if we really begin to genuinely care for the people, I think you can break the status quo. In the Philippines, down south, 15% of our population are Muslims, and there's big conflict right now in Mindanao, and it is dividing the country, in fact. It's almost like a 2-state direction. They want their autonomy and what have you. But we realize that philanthropists or NGOs like GK can bring in a different perspective and break the status quo, because right now we are working in conflict areas, delivering services for the poorest kids, women, and the elderly, just feeding them and caring for them and building communities that really begin to connect Christians and Muslims. When Typhoon Haiyan happened, everybody flocked to help, but that was mostly Christian provinces. When the conflict happened, almost just one Christian group went in to help. So I guess it's really about simply genuinely caring will break the status quo.
Thank you very much, and I think some of the examples of work that are coming out to build those bridges across communities to enable them to solve problems are together are incredibly inspiring. And we're going to you have the final word from the floor, and then we'll come back for final thoughts from the panel.
Thank you very much. My name is Darian Swig, and I work at the nexus of human rights and strategic philanthropy. And I'm going to pick up on what the gentleman just said and perhaps say it in a different way. At the core of the human rights movement, it's empathy. And if we can't achieve greater empathy, we won't get closer to peace. Thank you.
Before I'm going to give my panelists 30 seconds to think about their closing remarks, and I want you to leave everyone either with a final answer to a question or one thought. And I need you to be succinct and yeah, really kind of like meld it together, otherwise we'll be here for days and years with how much there is to talk about. My conclusion is that one of the things that's come across from the panel and from all of you is actually this thing about love. If we can't build systems that are respectful actually of the fact that we are human beings who do and should be loved, we will get nowhere. Something actually, I think the question around the structure of economies as much as religions was incredibly stimulating. That generated a lot more discussion than I could have possibly imagined. So thank you for that one, and thank you for all your amazing remarks. Okay, I'm going to start in the reverse order that we started. And Karen, what would you like to leave us with?
I would like to leave you with, I didn't get to talk about justice, which is my area, so afterwards please talk to me, because I have a lot to say on that. It makes me crazy. But the next thing is that I think that the things that are common is that at the end of the day, it is about money and power and all of these different things, right? Which also affects the justice sector, because we know that there's just no commitment to it. But it can be made, and what we've seen in our sector too is that when we work together with compassion and our interconnectedness, recognizing that we're coming from different places, it really works as we break down our stereotypes and walk together.
Great. I'm going to end with you, actually, Gidon, because I think you're going to give us a rousing presidential stump speech. Matthew.
Thank you. Hugely encouraging to meet you all, and thank you so much for coming. I think for me, the opportunity, as I said earlier, is huge from working and engaging with religious groups. They touch on so many people's lives. So understanding and engaging with that is absolutely crucial. The challenge is also massive. As we've discussed, religious narratives are corrupted by those that would seek power, to seek to control others. So how do we effectively counter that? How do we give people better ideas than those ideas? And how can we inoculate our societies against dangerous ideologies wherever they may come from, be they religious or capitalist or politically driven. Yeah, I'd just like to reflect on that. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you, Matthew. Carne.
To answer your question point, which I think is a very important one, I was for many years a British diplomat. I worked a lot on Iraq and Afghanistan. And I once believed that we could impose our values and that our values were so supreme and right that, you know, invading countries to allow those values to flourish was the right thing to do. And I really did believe that. And I served in Afghanistan and I saw the foolishness of that theory of change and also the hypocrisy of using violence to liberate people. And the reason I'm critical of our own society is I've come to believe that, you know, the thing we can really change is ourselves. That's where we have the most power and where we need to be consistent with our values. But that does not mean that I don't think those values are universal. I think the necessity of tolerating other people's beliefs is of universal importance and must be robustly asserted in every circumstance, regardless of the religion or the culture that you're dealing with. The idea that you cannot tolerate somebody else's religion, that yours is superior, is absolutely obnoxious and objectionable. And so, for instance, I believe, you know, very strongly that we should be giving the means of self-defense to the rebels in Syria who are fighting both the Assad regime and, you know, the obnoxious religious extremists of the Islamist State who are committing genocide in both Syria and northern Iraq. So I think these values are universal and must be very robustly asserted.
Thank you. Good.
So I think we need to stop the, political politeness of not talking about religion around the table. I mean, how many times are you warned? Well, you can talk about it, but don't talk about religion. So, in full respect, I say, God damn it, engage. We need to be speaking about religion and our values and the values that the different religious streams speak to, and do they truly reflect where we want to get to as a world, as a planet, as humanity. And we can only do that first and foremost in our own homes, starting around our own kitchen table and then taking that beyond. That's what I have to say.
Thank you to my wonderful, wonderful, very magical panelists. You've been truly amazing. And to you guys, I mean, that was really special. I'd like us to end doing a bit of a funny thing. I'd like you to look around the room into the eyes of people around you, and I'd like you to give them your blessing, however you do that, manifested from whatever wellspring of inspiration and belief. Because I think if we've heard one thing today, go out people, and spread the love.